3 years ago, Alpha King Kael Thorn stood before his entire pack and destroyed me. He called me weak, unworthy, forgettable. He rejected me in front of everyone, warriors, elders, even the children, and left me with nothing but shame and broken pride. That night I vanished into the outer territories, a place where most go to die. But I didn't die. I became something else, something stronger, something dangerous. Now I'm back, and Kael doesn't recognize the woman standing before him. But he will. Oh, he will. If you want to see how a rejected girl becomes the most feared alpha in the North, stay until the end. Hit that like button and comment what city you're watching from. The bonfire crackled in the center of the clearing, throwing wild shadows across the faces of the northern clans. Hundreds of wolves gathered under the pale moon, their eyes gleaming with anticipation. Tonight was supposed to be a celebration. The night Alpha King Kael Thorn would announce his chosen mate and solidify his reign over the 5 northern territories. Lyra Vance stood at the edge of the crowd, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. She wore a simple gray dress, nothing like the elaborate gowns of the high-born females who whispered and preened closer to the center. She'd never been one of them. Her father had been a low-ranking warrior who died defending the border when she was 12. Her mother followed him 2 winters later, worn down by grief and cold. Lyra had survived on scraps, odd jobs, and the thin thread of hope that maybe, just maybe, she mattered. And then Kael had looked at her. It had happened 3 months ago, during a border skirmish with a rogue pack. Lyra had been gathering herbs near the river when the attack came. She'd seen the enemy flank moving through the trees, heading straight for Kael's blind side. Without thinking, she'd screamed a warning. It had saved his life. He'd turned, caught her eye across the chaos, and for one breathless moment, something had passed between them. After that, he'd sought her out. Small conversations, a nod in passing. Once, he'd even smiled at her. The other females had noticed. The whispers started. Could it be? Could the Alpha King actually choose someone like her? Lyra hadn't dared to hope, but hope was a stubborn thing. Silence. Kael's voice cut through the noise like a blade. The crowd fell quiet instantly. He stood on the raised platform at the center of the gathering, firelight painting him in shades of gold and shadow. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair that fell just past his collar and eyes the color of storm clouds. Scars marked his arms and neck, proof of battles won, challenges survived. He looked every inch the warrior king he was. Beside him stood his beta, Marcus, a grizzled man with a permanent scowl. And on Kael's other side stood Seraphina Vale, daughter of the Western clan's Alpha. She was beautiful in the way that made other women look away. Pale skin, raven hair, a dress that probably cost more than Lyra had earned in her entire life. Seraphina's smile was small and satisfied, like she already knew how this night would end. 3 years ago, Kael began, his voice carrying easily across the clearing. I took the throne after my father fell in battle. I've spent every day since proving that I'm worthy to lead you. I've defended our borders. I've crushed our enemies. I've made the northern clans feared across every territory. Cheers erupted. Fists pounded against chests. Lyra's hands were shaking. She clenched them into fists and tried to breathe. But a king is only as strong as his queen, Kael continued. Tonight, I will announce my chosen mate, the woman who will stand beside me, the woman who will bear the next generation of leaders. The crowd leaned forward. Lyra felt like she was standing on the edge of a cliff. Kael's eyes swept over the gathering. For one impossible second, Lyra thought he was looking at her. Her breath caught. Then his gaze moved on. Before I make my announcement, Kael said, there's something I need to address. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Marcus frowned. Even Seraphina looked confused. Kael stepped forward, and this time his eyes locked directly onto Lyra. Her stomach dropped. Lyra Vance, he called out, step forward. The clearing went silent. Every head turned. Hundreds of eyes found her in the crowd. Lyra's legs felt like water, but somehow she moved. The crowd parted as she walked toward the platform, their stares burning into her skin. She could hear the whispers starting. Why her? What's happening? When she reached the base of the platform, she stopped. Kael looked down at her, his expression unreadable. You saved my life, he said. Lyra's throat was dry. Yes, You shouted a warning during the ambush. You put yourself at risk. She nodded, unable to form words. And because of that, Kyle said slowly, some people seem to think you have a claim on me. The whispers grew louder. Lyra's cheeks burned. I'm here to make something very clear, Kale continued, raising his voice so everyone could hear. Lyra Vance means nothing to me. The words hit like a physical blow. Lyra staggered back a step. She's a low-born nobody, Kyle said, his tone flat and cold. No family, no rank, no strength. She did what any loyal pack member should do. She gave a warning. That doesn't make her special. It doesn't make her worthy. Laughter started somewhere in the crowd. Then more. Lyra's vision blurred. You're weak, Kyle said, looking straight at her. You're forgettable. And you will never, ever be anything more than what you are right now. A girl who got lucky once and thought it meant something. The laughter was louder now. Someone shouted, "Tell her, Alpha!" Another voice called out, "She actually thought she had a chance." Lyra couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The humiliation was a living thing, wrapping around her throat and squeezing. Kale turned away from her, dismissing her as if she were nothing. He reached out, and Serafina took his hand, stepping forward with a triumphant smile. "This," Kale announced, "is my chosen mate, Serafina Vale, daughter of the West, strong, pure-blooded, worthy." The crowd erupted in cheers. Serafina raised Kale's hand in the air like a trophy. Someone started a chant, "Long live the king, long live the queen." Lyra stood frozen at the base of the platform, tears streaming down her face, while the entire pack celebrated above her. Oops. She didn't remember leaving the clearing. One moment she was standing there, drowning in shame, and the next she was running. Her feet pounded against the forest floor, branches whipping at her face and arms. She ran until her lungs burned and her legs gave out, collapsing in a heap at the base of a massive pine tree. The sobs came hard and ugly. She pressed her face into her hands and let them tear through her. All the hope she'd been carrying, all the stupid, fragile hope, shattered into 1,000 pieces. Weak, forgettable. Nothing. The words circled in her head like vultures. She'd been a fool. She'd let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she could be more than what she was. That someone like Kyle could see past her lack of rank and family and see her. But she'd been wrong. She'd always been wrong. A twig snapped nearby. Lyra's head jerked up. Through the darkness, she saw a figure approaching. For one wild second, she thought it might be Kyle, that he'd come to apologize, to say he hadn't meant it. But it wasn't Kyle. It was Marcus. The beta stopped a few feet away, his expression hard. "You need to leave." Lyra wiped at her face. "I know." "No," Marcus said. "I don't think you understand. You need to leave tonight, before sunrise." She stared at him. "What?" "The king made you a public spectacle," Marcus said bluntly. "The pack sees you as a joke now. Some will pity you. Others will mock you. A few will see you as an easy target." He crossed his arms. "If you stay, your life will be hell. And if you try to cause trouble, if you say the wrong thing to the wrong person, Kyle will have no choice but to deal with you, harshly." Lyra's chest tightened. "He'd kill me?" "He'd exile you at best. Make an example at worst." Marcus's voice softened, just slightly. "You seem like a decent girl. Don't give him a reason." "I didn't do anything wrong," Lyra whispered. "No," Marcus agreed. "But that doesn't matter. Not anymore." He turned and walked back toward the clearing, leaving her alone in the dark. Lyra sat there for a long time, the weight of everything pressing down on her. She had no family, no friends who would risk standing with her now. No money, no resources, no plan. But she wasn't going to stay here and let them grind her into dust. She pushed herself to her feet, legs still shaking. Her small cabin was on the far edge of the territory, barely more than a shack, really. She made her way there slowly, staying off the main paths. Inside, she gathered what little she had: a worn travel pack, a knife her father had left her, a water flask, and the few coins she'd saved. It wasn't much, but it would have to be enough. As she slung the pack over her shoulder, her eyes fell on the small mirror hanging on the wall. She looked at her reflection, red-rimmed eyes, tear-stained cheeks, tangled brown hair. She looked exactly like what Kyle had called her. Weak. Something hard and cold settled in her chest. "No," she said out loud. Her voice was rough but steady. "Not anymore." She didn't know where she was going. She didn't know how she'd survive. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She would never let anyone make her feel this small again. Lyra turned her back on the mirror, walked out of the cabin, and disappeared into the night. What? The outer territories were called the Deadlands for a reason. No pack claimed them. No laws protected travelers. The land was harsh and unforgiving. Dense forests gave way to rocky hills and treacherous ravines. Rogue wolves prowled the shadows, exiles and criminals who'd been cast out from their packs. Predators, both animal and human, hunted anything weak enough to fall. Lyra learned quickly, weakness got you killed. The first week was the hardest. She had no shelter, no fire, no idea how to hunt properly. She ate berries and roots, drank from streams, and slept in hollow trees with one hand on her knife. Every sound made her jump. Every shadow looked like a threat. On the 8th night, a rogue found her. He was a massive man, scarred and feral, with eyes that gleamed with hunger. He'd smelled her before she'd heard him, emerging from the darkness with a grin that showed too many teeth.
Well, well, he'd drawled. What's a little thing like you doing out here all alone? Lyra had backed against a tree, knife raised. Stay back. He'd laughed. Or what? You'll poke me with that toothpick? He'd lunged. Lyra didn't remember much of what happened next, just the blur of movement, the flash of her knife, the hot spray of blood. When it was over, the rogue was on the ground, clutching his throat, choking on his own blood. Lyra had stood over him, shaking so hard she could barely hold the knife. And then she'd taken his supplies, his pack, his water, his flint, even his boots, which fit better than hers. She'd left him there to die and kept moving. That was the first time she killed someone. It wouldn't be the last. 6 months into the Deadlands, Lyra stopped looking like the girl who'd been rejected. Her body hardened from constant movement and scarce food. Muscle replaced softness. Her hands grew calloused from climbing, fighting, surviving. She learned to track, to hunt, to move silently through the forest. She learned which plants were poison and which could heal. She learned how to read the wind and the sky, how to find water, how to hide her scent. And she learned how to fight, not the controlled, honor-bound combat of the pack sparring grounds. This was survival fighting, dirty, brutal, and efficient. She fought rogues, wild animals, and once, a group of bandits who'd thought she'd be easy prey. She won some fights, lost others. Every scar taught her something new. One night, huddled in a cave during a storm, she caught sight of her reflection in a puddle of rainwater. She didn't recognize herself. The soft, hopeful girl was gone. In her place was someone harder, sharper, someone who'd learned that mercy was a luxury and hesitation could get you killed. Someone who'd survived. A year into the Deadlands, Lyra encountered the first of the exiles. They were camped in a ravine, a ragged group of maybe 20 wolves, men and women who'd been cast out from various packs for crimes ranging from theft to murder. They were armed, dangerous, and suspicious of outsiders. Lyra should have avoided them, but she'd been tracking a deer for 2 days, and they'd killed it first. She'd walked into their camp with her knife in one hand and her head held high. "I want half that deer," she'd said. The leader, a scarred woman named Vex, had laughed. "You've got guts, girl. I'll give you that." "I tracked it for 2 days," Lyra said. "I'm not leaving without my share." "And if I say no?" Lyra had met her eyes. "Then we fight for it." Vex had studied her for a long moment. Then she'd grinned. "You know what? I like you. Sit. Eat. And then you can tell me what the hell a pack wolf is doing out here alone." Over roasted venison, Lyra had told her story. Not all of it. She'd left out names, details that could identify her. But she'd told them about the rejection, about being cast aside. The exiles had understood. Most of them had similar stories. "You want to survive out here?" Vex had said. "You need to stop thinking like a pack wolf. Out here, strength is all that matters. You want respect? Take it. You want power? Earn it." Lyra had listened, and she'd stayed. Quotes. 2 years in, Lyra wasn't just surviving anymore. She was thriving. Under Vex's guidance, she'd learned strategy, leadership, and how to command loyalty. The exiles respected strength, and Lyra had proven hers over and over. When rival groups tried to raid their camp,
She'd been the one to organize the defense. When food ran low, she'd led hunting parties deep into dangerous territory. When disputes broke out, she'd settled them with a combination of reason and force. Slowly, the exiles began to look to her for direction. Vex noticed. One night, she'd pulled Lyra aside. "You've got something most people don't," she'd said. "You've got fire, and you know how to use it." "I'm just trying to survive," Lyra had replied. "Bullshit," Vex had said with a grin. "You're not just surviving, you're building something." And she was right. More exiles joined them. Word spread of a group in the Deadlands that didn't just scavenge. They controlled territory. They protected their own. They had rules, structure, leadership. They had Lyra. By the end of the second year, their numbers had grown to nearly 100. They held 3 campsites across a stretch of land that covered almost 50 miles. They traded with passing travelers, offered protection in exchange for supplies, and defended their territory from anyone foolish enough to challenge them. They weren't a pack in the traditional sense, but they were something. And at the center of it all was Lyra Vance, the girl who'd been called weak and forgettable. She trained every day, pushing herself harder than anyone else. She sparred with the best fighters, studied tactics with the sharpest minds, and earned every ounce of respect she received. She also made a promise to herself. She would never be powerless again. Chet. 3 years to the day after her rejection, Lyra stood on a cliff overlooking the western edge of the Deadlands. Behind her, 100 wolves waited in formation. They were armed, disciplined, and loyal. They wore mismatched armor and carried weapons scavenged from a dozen different sources, but they moved like a unit. Vex stood beside her, arms crossed.
"You sure about this?" Lyra nodded. "It's time." "Going back is risky," Vex said. "You know that, right? If Kyle finds out—"
"Let him," Lyra said. Her voice was calm, but there was steel underneath. "I'm not hiding anymore." News had reached them a month ago. Tensions were rising between the northern clans and a coalition of southern packs. Border skirmishes were escalating into full battles. Kyle's territory was being squeezed from multiple sides, and rumors said he was looking for allies. Lyra had made her decision. She would return, not as the broken girl who'd fled into the night, not as someone begging for scraps. She would return as a leader, as someone with power, resources, and an army at her back. And Kyle Thorne would have no choice but to face her. "All right," Vex said with a sharp grin. "Let's go shake things up." Lyra turned to the gathered wolves. They looked back at her with respect, trust, and something close to devotion. "We move at dawn," she called out. "Pack light, stay sharp, and remember, we're not going back to beg. We're going back to take what's ours." A cheer went up. Fists pounded against chests. Lyra closed her eyes and let the sound wash over her. 3 years ago, she'd been nothing. Now, she was a force to be reckoned with. And Cale Thorne was about to find out just how badly he'd underestimated her. The northern border hadn't changed much in 3 years. Lyra stood in the tree line, watching the guards patrol the stone wall that marked Kyle's territory. 2 sentries walked the ramparts, their movements lazy and predictable. Beyond the wall, she could see smoke rising from the main settlement. Cook fires, forges, the daily rhythm of pack life continuing as it always had. It looked smaller than she remembered. Vex crouched beside her, studying the fortifications with a critical eye. "Not exactly impressive, is it?" "It doesn't need to be," Lyra said quietly. "Most packs won't challenge the northern clans directly. Kale's reputation does half the work. And the other half? Brutality." Lyra had seen it firsthand, back when she'd still lived here. Kale ruled through strength and fear. Challenges were met with overwhelming force. Dissent was crushed publicly. It kept the pack unified, but it also made them rigid, predictable. Vex grunted. "So what's the play? We announcing ourselves or sneaking in?" Lyra smiled, though there was no warmth in it. "Neither. We're going to make them invite us in." Behind them, hidden in the deeper forest, 98 wolves waited in silence. Lyra had left the weakest dozen back at their main camp. This mission required discipline and control, not raw numbers. Every person she'd brought could follow orders, fight when necessary, and keep their mouths shut. They'd need all 3. "Mark is still the beta?" Vex asked. "Should be, unless Kyle got paranoid and killed him." Lyra pulled a small telescope from her pack and scanned the settlement. "There. 3rd building from the center. That's the council hall."
You planning to walk right up and knock? Something like that. Vex shook her head. You've got balls, I'll give you that. What if they just kill you on sight? They won't, Lyra said with certainty. Kael's at war. He needs allies. And I'm about to offer him exactly what he needs, on my terms.
The first guard spotted them an hour before sunset. Lyra had arranged it carefully. Visible approach from the main road, small group of 5 including herself, hands empty of weapons but posture confident. Not aggressive, but not submissive either. The guard, a young male with nervous eyes, nearly fell off the wall in his rush to sound the alarm. Within minutes, 20 armed wolves poured out of the gate, forming a defensive line. Lyra stopped 50 feet away and waited. The wolves stared at her group with suspicion and confusion. She recognized a few faces, veterans who'd served under her father, younger warriors who'd barely been adults when she'd left. None of them recognized her. She'd made sure of that. Her hair was shorter now, pulled back in a severe braid. Her clothes were practical leather and worn canvas, nothing like the simple dresses she'd worn before. 3 years of survival had carved away every soft edge, leaving someone harder and sharper. Someone new! The crowd parted and Marcus pushed through. He looked older. Gray streaked his beard and new scars marked his face. But his eyes were still sharp, still calculating. He studied Lyra's group, his hand resting on his sword hilt. "State your business," he barked. Lyra stepped forward. "I'm here to see Alpha Kyle. Tell him the leader of the Deadland Coalition requests an audience." That got a reaction. Murmurs rippled through the gathered wolves. The Deadland Coalition had been making noise for the past 6 months, taking territory, establishing trade routes, even crushing a few smaller rogue groups that had gotten too bold. But they were still considered little more than organized bandits. Marcus's eyes narrowed. The king doesn't meet with exile trash. He will for this. Lyra kept her voice level. I have information about the Southern Pact's movements, troop numbers, supply lines, planned attacks. She paused. And I have 100 trained fighters who can reinforce his borders. In exchange for what? That's between me and the king. Marcus studied her for a long moment. Lyra held his gaze without flinching. She knew how this worked. Show weakness now and they'd dismiss her entirely. But show too much confidence and they'd see her as a threat. Finally, Marcus jerked his head toward the gate. You and one other. The rest stay here under guard. Any trouble and we kill them all. Agreed. Vex stepped forward to join her, and together they followed Marcus through the gate. The settlement was exactly as Lyra remembered. Clusters of wooden buildings arranged around a central square, with the Alpha's hall dominating the north end. Wolves stopped to stare as they passed. Some looked curious, others hostile. A few whispered behind their hands. Lyra ignored them all. The hall was a massive structure built from dark timber and stone, with banners hanging from the rafters showing the Northern Clan's symbol, a wolf's head beneath a crescent moon. Guards flanked the entrance and more lined the interior walls. And at the far end, seated on a raised throne of carved wood and bone, was Kael. He looked the same, older maybe, harder around the eyes, but still every inch the Alpha King. He wore simple combat leathers, his sword resting against the throne within easy reach. Beside him stood Seraphina, dressed in deep blue silk, her expression bored. Marcus led them to the center of the hall and stopped. The exile leader, my king. She claims to have information. Kael's gaze swept over Lyra, dismissive and cold. You have 30 seconds. Make it worth my time. Lyra met his eyes and felt nothing. No pain, no anger, no residual hurt from 3 years ago. Just cold calculation. The Southern Coalition plans to attack your eastern border in 2 weeks, she said clearly. 300 fighters led by Alpha Tauren of the River Clans. They'll hit at dawn, using the forest cover to mask their approach. Kyle's expression didn't change. And you know this how? Because Tauren tried to recruit my people first. When I refused, he got drunk and boasted about his plans. Lyra shrugged. Fool thought I'd be impressed. Why come to me? Why not just let us fight it out and pick over the scraps? Because the southern packs are expanding. Today it's your border. Tomorrow it's mine. Better to stop them now while we can. Seraphina leaned forward, her voice dripping with disdain. And you expect us to just trust the word of some deadland trash? For all we know, this is a trap. Lyra turned to look at her. If I wanted to trap you, I wouldn't walk through your front door. I'd wait until you were weak and bleeding from Torin's attack, then move in. Careful, Kael said, his voice dropping to a dangerous rumble. You're in my hall. Show respect. I'm showing you the truth, Lyra countered. Whether you believe it or not is up to you. The hall went silent. Several warriors shifted, hands moving toward weapons. Vex tensed beside her. Then Kael laughed, a short, sharp sound without humor. You've got nerve. I'll give you that. He leaned back in his throne. Let's say I believe you. What do you want in return for this information? Recognition, Lyra said. Official acknowledgement of the Deadland Coalition as a legitimate territory. Trade agreements, and a mutual defense pact. You want me to legitimize a gang of exiles and criminals? I want you to acknowledge reality. The Deadlands aren't empty anymore. We control the trade routes through the eastern passes. We've got resources, fighters, and organization. You can either work with us or spend the next decade fighting us while your enemies circle. Marcus muttered something under his breath. Serafina looked outraged. But Kael's expression was thoughtful. Interesting proposition, he said slowly. But I need more than words. Prove your people can fight. Prove they're worth the political cost of allying with exiles. Name the test. Join us in the Eastern Defense. Put your 100 fighters where your mouth is. If you help us crush Torin's attack, we'll discuss terms. Lyra nodded. Done. One more condition, Kael added, his eyes locking onto hers. You fight under my command, my orders, my strategy. If you disobey or betray us, I'll kill every exile you brought and mount your head on my wall. Understood? Lyra smiled. It wasn't a pleasant expression. Understood. They were given quarters in the outer barracks, basic bunks and minimal privacy, segregated from the main pack. Guards watched them constantly. The message was clear. They were useful, but not trusted. Vex threw her pack onto a bunk and scowled. This is bullshit. We're basically prisoners. For now, Lyra agreed. She moved to the small window and looked out at the settlement. Wolves moved through the streets, going about their evening routines. She spotted a few familiar faces. Warriors who'd once served with her father, merchants she'd bought bread from as a child. None of them knew who she was. The girl they remembered was dead. You really think he'll honor the agreement? Vex asked. No, Lyra turned from the window. But I think he'll honor it long enough for us to prove ourselves indispensable. After that, it becomes a question of who has more leverage. And if he tries to kill us, then we make sure he fails. A knock on the door interrupted them. Marcus entered without waiting for permission, his expression grim. The king wants to review your forces, he said. Tomorrow morning, training grounds. He'll assess whether you're worth the risk. We'll be ready, Lyra said. Marcus started to leave, then paused. I don't know what game you're playing, exile, but Kael's not stupid. If you're planning something... I'm planning to keep my people alive, Lyra interrupted. Same as you, same as everyone. Marcus studied her for another moment, then left without another word. Vex waited until his footsteps faded. He suspects something. Of course he does. He's good at his job. Lyra sat on her bunk, pulling out a whetstone and her knife. But suspicion isn't proof. As long as we don't give him a reason, we're fine. And the king? When's he going to figure out who you really are? Lyra dragged the blade across the stone, the metallic rasp filling the silence. Eventually. But by then, it won't matter. The training grounds were packed. Word had spread that the exile fighters were being assessed, and apparently half the pack had turned out to watch. Warriors lined the fences, placing bets and making crude jokes. Lyra spotted Serafina among the crowd, standing with a group of highborn females, all of them watching with poorly concealed contempt. Lyra's 100 fighters stood in formation in the center of the grounds. They looked rough, compared to the northern clan's polished warriors. Mismatched armor, scarred faces, weapons that had seen hard use. But they stood with discipline, eyes forward, waiting for orders. Kael walked onto the field with Marcus at his side. The crowd quieted. So, Kael called out, his voice carrying easily, these are the famous Deadland Coalition. Let's see if you're worth the trouble. He gestured, and a group of 20 northern warriors stepped forward. They were fully armored, carrying practice weapons, and looked thoroughly unimpressed. "Simple test," Kyle announced. "Your fighters against mine. First to yield or fall loses. We'll run 3 matches." Lyra stepped forward. "What are the stakes?" "If you win, I'll consider your people competent. If you lose, you leave my territory immediately, and we forget this conversation happened." "And if we win all 3? Kale smiled coldly. "That won't happen." Lyra turned to her fighters. "Darius, Mira, and Cole, you're up." 3 fighters stepped forward from her ranks. A scarred veteran with a massive axe, a quick woman with twin blades, and a young male who fought with a spear. They moved into position without hesitation. The Northern warriors charged. The first match was brutal and fast. Darius took a hit to the shoulder but powered through, his axe sweeping low and taking out 2 opponents' legs. Mira danced around a sword strike and buried both blades in her target's armor joints, forcing a yield. Cole's spear work was surgical, precise, keeping his opponents at distance while Darius and Mira did the heavy work. 10 seconds. All 3 Northern warriors down. The crowd erupted in shocked murmurs. Kyle's expression didn't change, but Marcus looked troubled. "Again," Kyle ordered. The second match lasted longer. The Northern warriors had adjusted their tactics, working as a unit instead of individuals. But Lyra's fighters adapted faster. They used the rough terrain, created openings, and exploited every mistake. When the dust settled, 2 Northern warriors were unconscious, and the third had yielded. The crowd was no longer laughing. The third match was Kyle's last attempt to save face. He sent his best, veteran warriors who'd fought in a dozen campaigns, who moved like a single unit, who gave no quarter. Lyra pulled her 3 fighters back and stepped onto the field herself. The crowd went silent. "I'll take this one," she said quietly. Vex started to protest, but Lyra silenced her with a look. This needed to happen. Kale needed to understand exactly who he was dealing with. The Northern veterans spread out, circling her. One of them grinned. "You sure about this, Exile? We don't hold back." "Good," Lyra said. "Neither do I." They came at her from 3 sides simultaneously, a coordinated strike meant to overwhelm. Lyra dropped low, feeling the first blade pass over her head, then drove her shoulder into the second warrior's gut. As he folded, she grabbed his arm and used his momentum to throw him into the third attacker. Both went down in a tangle of limbs. The first warrior recovered and swung at her back. Lyra twisted, caught the blade on her forearm guard, and punched him in the throat. He staggered back, choking. The remaining 2 fighters got to their feet and attacked together, more cautious now. They were good, precise strikes, solid defense, working in perfect sync. But Lyra had spent 3 years fighting for her life against opponents who didn't care about honor or rules. She fought dirty. A kick to the knee that hyperextended the joint, a thrown handful of dirt that blinded, a strike to the solar plexus that left one warrior gasping. 20 seconds later, all 3 were on the ground. Lyra stood over them, breathing hard but steady. Blood dripped from a cut on her cheek, but she barely felt it. The adrenaline was singing in her veins, sharp and clean. She turned to face Kyle. "Competent enough?" she asked. The training ground was dead silent. Every wolf stared at her with a mixture of shock and something close to fear. Even Serafina looked shaken. Kyle rose from his seat slowly. He walked onto the field, stopping a few feet away from Lyra. His expression was unreadable. "Who trained you?" he asked quietly. "Survival," Lyra answered. "Bullshit. Nobody fights like that without proper training." "Then I guess I'm a quick learner." They stared at each other for a long moment. Lyra could feel the weight of his attention, the razor edge of his scrutiny. He was trying to place her, to figure out why she seemed familiar. "Not yet," she thought. "Not yet." Finally, Kyle stepped back. "You've proven your point. Your people can fight." He raised his voice so the entire crowd could hear. "The Deadland Coalition will join us in defending the eastern border. Anyone who disrespects them answers to me." The crowd dispersed slowly, still murmuring. Warriors cast glances over their shoulders, reevaluating. Marcus approached, his expression troubled. "My king, perhaps we should—" "Not now," Kael cut him off. His eyes were still on Lyra. "We'll discuss strategy tonight. Be ready." Then he turned and walked away, Serafina hurrying to keep up. Vex appeared at Lyra's side, grinning. "Well, that went well." Lyra wiped the blood from her cheek. "That was the easy part." "What's the hard part?"
keeping him from figuring out who I am before we're ready. Lyra watched Kael's retreating back, because when he does, this whole arrangement goes to hell. The strategy meeting happened after nightfall in Kael's private war room. It was a smaller chamber off the main hall, dominated by a large table covered with maps and markers. Kael stood at the head, Marcus to his right. Several senior warriors occupied the other seats, and at the far end, Lyra stood with Vex and 3 of her best scouts. Kael gestured to the map. The eastern border runs along this ridge. Tauren will likely approach through the valley here. He pointed. Dense forest, good cover, direct route to our main settlement. He'll expect you to fortify the valley entrance, Lyra said, studying the map. Put your main force there. That's standard defensive strategy, Marcus countered. What's your point? My point is that Tauren's not an idiot. He'll expect the obvious defense, which means he's planning something to counter it. Such as? Lyra traced a line on the map. A flanking force, probably moving through the northern pass here. Smaller group, maybe 50 fighters, meant to hit your rear while the main force pins you in the valley. Kael frowned. That pass is treacherous. It'd take days to move troops through it. Only if you're bringing supply wagons and heavy equipment. A light, fast-moving force could do it in half the time. Lyra met his eyes. It's what I would do. The room fell silent. The senior warriors exchanged glances. If you're right, Kael said slowly, we need to cover both approaches. Split our forces. No, Lyra said. That's what he wants. Divide your strength and he'll crush each piece separately. Then what do you suggest? Lyra pulled a marker and drew on the map. Put your main force here in the valley. Make it obvious. Lots of fires, visible patrols, banners flying. Make Tauren think he's got you exactly where he wants you. And the flanking force? My people handle it. Lyra drew another line. We move into position in the northern pass before his flankers arrive. When they come through, we ambush them, hard and fast, before they can signal the main force. Marcus shook his head. That's a suicide mission. If you're wrong about the flank, you'll be out of position and useless. And if you're right but fail to stop them, then we die, Lyra said flatly. But we won't fail. You can't guarantee that. No, but I can guarantee that if Tauren's flank hits your rear, you lose everything. She looked at Kael. This is the best option. You know it. Kael stared at the map, jaw tight. Finally, he nodded. Fine. Your people take the northern approach, but if this goes wrong, it won't. It better not. Kael's eyes were cold, because if you fail, or if this is some kind of betrayal, I will hunt down every exile in the Deadlands and burn them alive. Clear? Crystal, Lyra said. 3 days later, Lyra's forces moved into position. The northern pass was exactly as treacherous as Kael had said. Narrow trails along steep cliffs, loose rock that could trigger avalanches, and freezing wind that cut through even the thickest firs. Moving 100 fighters through it without being spotted required perfect coordination and absolute silence. They managed it. Lyra positioned her people in hidden alcoves along the pass, creating a kill zone that any approaching force would have to walk through. Then they waited. The first night was quiet, so was the second. On the third night, as dawn approached, one of her scouts signaled movement. Lyra moved to the ridge and looked down. In the dim pre-dawn light, she could see them. A column of fighters moving through the pass single file, weapons ready, moving with the confidence of soldiers who thought they were undetected. She counted 47. Close enough. Lyra raised her hand, her fighters tensed, ready. She waited until the enemy column was fully committed to the narrow section of the pass. Then she dropped her hand. Chaos erupted. Her archers fired from above, arrows raining down. Fighters dropped from hidden positions, blocking the retreat. The enemy force tried to rally, tried to form defensive positions, but there was nowhere to go. The pass was too narrow, the attack too sudden. It was over in 3 minutes. Lyra walked among the bodies, checking for survivors. A few groaned. Most were still. At the head of the column, she found the leader, a grizzled warrior with River Clan markings. He coughed blood and glared at her. Who? The hell? Someone smarter than your alpha, Lyra said. She signaled to Vex. Secure the pass. No one gets through. What about the main battle? Lyra looked toward the valley, where she could hear the distant sounds of combat. Kael's on his own. Our job is done. But even as she said it, she felt the pull, the need to know, to see, to watch Kael face the consequences of his choices. Actually, she said slowly, let's move. I want to see how this ends. They reached the valley's edge just as the sun broke over the horizon. Below, the battle was in full swing. Kael's forces held the valley entrance, a disciplined line of shields and spears holding against Tauren's repeated charges. Bodies littered the ground. The clash of metal and the screams of the wounded filled the air. But something was wrong. Tauren's main force should have been flagging by now, their assault losing momentum. Instead, they seemed fresh, pressing harder. "Where's their second wave?" Vex muttered. Lyra scanned the battlefield and felt ice settle in her gut. There isn't one. They committed everything to the frontal assault. But the flanking force was a decoy. Lyra's mind raced. Tauren never planned to split his forces. He sent the flank to draw us out of position, to make Kael divide his strength. The real plan was always a straight assault with overwhelming numbers. Then why aren't they winning? Because Kael didn't divide his forces. He kept them concentrated. Lyra watched the battle with new understanding. He didn't trust my intel completely. Smart bastard. Below, Tauren's lines were beginning to waver. Kael's warriors pushed forward, their superior discipline starting to tell. Tauren himself was in the thick of it, a massive figure wielding a double-bladed axe, trying to rally his fighters. It wasn't working. They're breaking, Vex observed. Not yet, but soon. Lyra made a decision. Move down, hit their left flank while they're focused on Kael. We're supposed to be holding the pass. The pass is secure. There's no one left to come through. Lyra drew her sword. And I didn't come all this way to sit on the sidelines. They descended rapidly, using the slope for speed and momentum. Tauren's forces were so focused on the frontal assault, they didn't see the 100 fighters pouring down the hillside until it was too late. Lyra hit their flank like a hammer. Her fighters crashed into the enemy line, swords and axes carving through surprised warriors. The sudden assault shattered Tauren's formation. Fighters turned to face the new threat, which left their backs exposed to Kael's advance. It became a rout. Tauren's warriors broke and ran, scattering into the forest. Some tried to surrender. Most just fled. Tauren himself fought on, surrounded by a shrinking circle of loyal fighters. He saw Lyra approaching and grinned through blood-stained teeth. "You," he spat. "You lying bitch. You were working with him all along." "No," Lyra said calmly. "I was working for myself. You were just stupid enough to give me the information I needed." She'd never intended to join Tauren's assault, but when he'd approached her 3 weeks ago, drunk and boastful, she'd encouraged his talking, asked careful questions, learned his entire plan, and then sold it to Kael. Tauren roared and charged. Lyra sidestepped his axe and drove her sword through his ribs. He fell hard, gasping. "Should have kept your mouth shut," she said quietly. Then she turned and walked away, leaving him to bleed out. The battlefield fell silent as the last of Tauren's forces scattered. Kael stood in the center of the carnage, blood-spattered and breathing hard. His warriors cheered, raising weapons in victory. Around him, northern clan fighters embraced, laughed, counted their living and mourned their dead. Then Kael's eyes found Lyra. She stood on the far side of the field, her own fighters clustered around her. She met his gaze across the distance and saw something shift in his expression. Recognition. Not complete, not yet. But the pieces were starting to fit together in his mind, the way she fought, the way she commanded. Something familiar in the set of her jaw, the cold calculation in her eyes. He started walking toward her. Lyra's fighters tensed, but she waved them back. This needed to happen. The moment had been building since the day she'd walked back through his gates. Kael stopped a few feet away. Up close, she could see the exhaustion in his face, the weight of command. But mostly, she saw the question in his eyes. "Who are you?" he asked quietly. Lyra smiled. It was a terrible expression, full of edges. "Someone you should have remembered," she said, and before he could respond, before the recognition could fully form, Marcus came running across the field, urgency written across his face. "My king," he shouted. "The scouts just returned. The Western clans are mobilizing. They're moving toward our border, and they're bringing everyone."
Kael's attention snapped away from Lyra. How many? Thousands. Maybe 5, maybe 6. They're calling it a cleansing. They mean to wipe us out. The victory celebration died. Warriors turned to stare at Marcus in shock and dawning horror. Kael's jaw tightened. He looked at Lyra one more time, conflict warring in his expression. Then he made his choice. We'll discuss this later, he said. Right now, we have bigger problems. He turned and strode away, already barking orders, organizing the retreat. Lyra watched him go, her smile fading. Vex appeared at her side. He's starting to remember. I know. What do we do? Lyra looked at the blood-soaked battlefield, at Kael rallying his exhausted warriors, at the impossible situation they'd all just stepped into. We survive, she said, same as always. But this time she knew it was going to cost more than blood. The war room was packed with bodies and tension. Every senior warrior in the northern clans had crammed into the space, along with scouts, strategists, and anyone else Kael deemed necessary. Maps covered every surface. Candles burned down to stubs. And at the center of it all, Kael stood with his hands braced on the table, staring at the markers that represented 6,000 enemy fighters closing in on his territory. Lyra leaned against the far wall, arms crossed, watching the chaos unfold. We can't hold the outer settlements, one of the senior warriors was saying, a grizzled veteran named Torben. We need to pull everyone back to the main compound, fortify here. And abandon half our territory? Another warrior snapped. That's surrender. That's survival, Torben shot back. We're outnumbered 6-1. The Western clans aren't coming for a border dispute. They're coming for extermination. Then we hit them before they're organized, a younger warrior suggested. Strike their camp, kill their leaders. With what forces? Marcus interrupted, his voice cutting through the argument. We just lost 30 fighters in the valley. We're exhausted, low on supplies, and our wounded need time to heal. A preemptive strike would be suicide. The room erupted in overlapping voices, everyone talking over each other, proposing plans that ranged from desperate to insane. Kael said nothing. He just stared at the map, his jaw tight. Lyra pushed off the wall and walked forward. You're all thinking too small. The room fell silent. Warriors turned to stare at her with expressions ranging from hostile to curious. She'd earned some respect on the battlefield, but to most of them, she was still in exile, an outsider. Excuse me? Torben said coldly. You're treating this like a standard military engagement, Lyra continued, stepping up to the table. You're thinking about troop movements, fortifications, supply lines. But the Western clans aren't playing by those rules. And you know this how? Seraphina's voice dripped with disdain. She stood near Kael, dressed in silver and white, looking like she'd never touched dirt in her life. What would an exile know about clan politics? Lyra ignored her and spoke directly to Kael. Why now? Why are the Western clans mobilizing after years of relative peace? They see weakness, Marcus answered. We just fought off Tauren. Our forces are depleted. It's opportunistic. Partially, Lyra agreed. But there's more to it. The Western clans are rich. They control the trade routes, the fertile valleys, the merchant cities. They don't need your territory. So why risk thousands of fighters in a war of extermination? Kael's eyes narrowed. What are you suggesting? Someone's backing them, providing resources, intelligence, maybe even fighters. Lyra tapped the map. The Western clans are the weapon, but someone else is wielding it. The room stirred uncomfortably. That's speculation, Torben said. Is it? Lyra pulled a folded piece of parchment from her jacket and tossed it on the table. One of Tauren's surviving fighters talked before he died, said they were promised support from the West if they weakened the northern clans first. Kael picked up the parchment and read it, his expression darkening. Where did you get this? I asked the right questions. Lyra met his gaze. Tauren's attack wasn't random. It was coordinated, part of a larger plan to squeeze you from multiple sides. Then who's behind it? Marcus demanded. Lyra glanced at Seraphina. That's the question, isn't it? Seraphina's face flushed. How dare you imply— I'm not implying anything, Lyra said calmly. I'm stating facts. The Western clans benefit from destroying the Northern clans. And coincidentally, the king's mate comes from a Western family with deep political ties. The room exploded. Warriors shouted accusations. Others defended Seraphina. Marcus called for order. Serafina herself looked ready to attack Lyra on the spot. Enough! Kale's voice cut through the chaos like a whip crack. Everyone fell silent. He turned to Serafina, his expression unreadable. Is there any truth to this? Of course not, Serafina said, her voice shaking with rage. This exile walks in here and spreads lies, and you actually entertain them? I'm asking a question, Kael said quietly. Answer it. My family has always been loyal to the Alliance. That's not what I asked. Serafina's eyes flashed. I won't dignify this with a response. If you believe her over me, then perhaps we have bigger problems than the Western clans. She turned and swept out of the room, her attendant scrambling to follow. The silence she left behind was thick and uncomfortable. Kael closed his eyes briefly, then looked at Lyra. You just made an enemy. I've got plenty already. One more won't kill me. It might. Kael straightened. But right now we don't have time for this. Whether Serafina's involved or not, we still have 6,000 fighters bearing down on us. So unless you've got a solution, Exile, I suggest you stop stirring up trouble. Lyra held his gaze for a long moment. Then she leaned over the map and began moving markers. Here's what we do, she said. We abandon the outer settlements like Torben suggested. Pull everyone back to the main compound. Make it look like we're turtling up, preparing for a siege. We just said that's surrender, someone protested. It's bait, Lyra corrected. The Western clans will see the abandoned settlements and assume we're weak, desperate. They'll push hard for the main compound, expecting an easy victory. And then what? Kael asked. Lyra smiled, and it was cold. Then we burn everything they brought with them. Che, the plan was insane. That was the general consensus among Kael's warriors, as Lyra laid it out in detail. It required perfect timing, absolute discipline, and a willingness to sacrifice everything for a slim chance at survival. Which was exactly why Lyra knew it would work. The Western clans are bringing their full force, she explained, pointing to the map. That means supply wagons, siege equipment, medical tents, everything they need to sustain a prolonged campaign. That's their strength, but it's also their weakness. All that equipment slows them down, makes them predictable. So we hit their supply lines, Marcus said slowly, understanding dawning. Not just hit them, destroy them completely. Lyra traced a route on the map. My scouts report they're moving through the western pass here. It's the only route wide enough for their wagons. We position forces here and here. She marked 2 points. And when they're committed to the pass, we trigger rock slides, trap them. That won't kill 6,000 fighters, Torben pointed out. No, but it'll separate them from their supplies. No food, no medical equipment, no siege weapons. They'll have to choose between pushing forward with what they're carrying or retreating to regroup. They'll push forward, Kael said with certainty. The Western clans don't retreat. It's a matter of pride. Exactly. And when they do, they'll be hungry, tired, and pissed off. They'll hit the main compound hard and fast, trying to end it quickly. Which is where we'll be waiting, Kael finished, seeing it now. Behind walls, well-fed, well-armed. We bleed them in a siege they can't sustain. And when they're weak enough, Lyra added, we counterattack, drive them back into the pass where they're trapped between the rock slides and our forces. The room was quiet as the warriors processed the plan. It's risky, Marcus finally said. It's suicide if anything goes wrong, Torben added. Got a better option? Lyra asked. No one did. Kael studied the map for a long moment, his expression grim. Then he looked at Lyra. You'll lead the rock slide teams. Take 50 of your best. The rest of your forces integrate with mine for the siege defense. Lyra nodded. Agreed. If you fail, if those slides don't trigger, or if you get the timing wrong, I won't. You can't know that. No, Lyra admitted. But I can control the variables, and I'm betting my life on it, same as you. Something flickered in Kael's eyes. Respect, maybe, or recognition. But he just nodded and turned to his warriors. You have your orders. Evacuate the outer settlements, reinforce the main walls, and someone find Serafina. I need to talk to her. The warriors dispersed, moving with the urgency of people who knew death was coming. Lyra started to leave, but Kael's voice stopped her. Wait. She turned. The room was empty now except for the two of them and Marcus, who stood by the door. Who are you really? Kael asked quietly.
And don't give me that Deadland Coalition bullshit. I've been watching you, the way you move, the way you think. You're not just some exile who got lucky. Lyra's heart hammered, but her face stayed calm. Does it matter? It might. If I'm trusting you with half my defensive strategy, I need to know who I'm dealing with. You're dealing with someone who wants to survive, Lyra said. Same as you. That's all you need to know. Kale took a step closer, studying her face. She could see him trying to piece it together, memories struggling to surface. Then Marcus cleared his throat. My king, the scouts are waiting for your orders. The moment broke. Kale stepped back, the question still in his eyes but temporarily shelved. Fine, he said. But when this is over, you and I are having a conversation, and you're going to tell me the truth. If we're both alive, Lyra agreed. Deal. She walked out before he could press further, her pulse racing. Vex caught up with her in the corridor. That was close. Too close, Lyra muttered. We need to move fast. The longer I'm around him, the more he's going to remember. Maybe that's not such a bad thing. Lyra shot her a sharp look. Yes, it is. Because when he figures out I'm the girl he humiliated 3 years ago, he's going to wonder what else I've been lying about. And then this whole alliance falls apart. Or, Vex suggested carefully, he realizes he made a mistake and tries to make it right. Lyra laughed bitterly. Men like Kyle don't apologize. They justify. And I don't need his justifications. I need his army. They reached the outer courtyard where Lyra's fighters were assembling. 50 of them, as ordered. Climbers, demolition experts, scouts who could move fast and silent through rough terrain. Lyra addressed them quickly and quietly. We've got one shot at this. The Western clans are moving through the pass in 3 days. We need to be in position 2 days before that. No fires, no noise, absolute concealment. When they enter the kill zone, we bring the mountain down on them. Questions? One of the fighters, a scarred woman named Reyna, raised her hand. What if they scout the pass first? What if they find us? Then we kill the scouts and hope they didn't send word back. Lyra's voice was flat. This isn't a training exercise. People are going to die. Maybe us, maybe them. But if we do this right, we give everyone in that compound a chance. The fighters nodded grimly. They were exiles, outlaws, people who'd survived by being harder than their circumstances. They understood sacrifice. Move out in 1 hour, Lyra ordered. Light gear only. And say your goodbyes. Some of us won't be coming back. The Western Pass was a natural bottleneck carved between two massive cliff faces. Lyra and her team had been in position for 36 hours, hidden in alcoves and crevices high above the pass floor. They'd marked the weak points in the rock face, packed them with stolen mining explosives, and run trigger lines to concealed positions. Now they waited. Lyra lay flat on a narrow ledge, peering down at the pass through a gap in the rocks. Beside her, Vex shifted uncomfortably. My back is killing me, Vex muttered. Quiet. I'm just saying, if I survive this, I'm never climbing another mountain. You won't survive if you don't shut up. Vex fell silent, but Lyra could feel her tension. They all felt it. The waiting was worse than the fighting. Every hour stretched like a day. Every sound made them jump. Every shadow could be the enemy. On the second night, one of the scouts signaled movement. Lyra crawled to the edge and looked down. In the moonlight, she could see the advance guard of the Western clans, maybe 200 fighters, moving carefully through the pass, checking for ambushes. Smart. She watched them search the pass floor, probe the cliff faces, test the stability of the path. They found nothing. The explosives were too well hidden, the trigger lines too thin to spot in the dark. After an hour, the advance guard signaled all clear and withdrew. Lyra let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Tomorrow, she whispered to Vex. They'll bring the main force tomorrow. Dawn came cold and gray. Lyra woke from a half-sleep to the sound of distant drums. She crawled to the ledge and felt her stomach drop. The Western clans were coming, thousands of them, stretching back through the pass like a river of steel and flesh. Warriors marched in formation, their armor glinting dully in the weak sunlight. Behind them came the supply train, hundreds of wagons carrying food, weapons, medical supplies, siege equipment. And at the very back, moving slowly but inexorably,
were the massive trebuchets, disassembled and loaded onto reinforced carts. It was the largest military force Lyra had ever seen, and she was about to drop a mountain on them. She signaled to her teams scattered across both cliff faces. Everyone acknowledged. 50 fighters, holding the fate of the northern clans in their hands. The western forces moved deeper into the pass. Lyra waited, counting silently. She needed them committed, too far in to retreat quickly, but with enough space that the rock slides would trap them instead of just blocking the entrance. The front lines reached the center of the pass. The supply wagons were fully committed. The trebuchets were just entering the narrow section. Now. Lyra pulled the trigger line. Nothing happened. Her heart stopped. She yanked harder, felt the line go taut, heard the distant click of the mechanism. The cliff face exploded. Not just her charge. All of them, up and down both sides of the pass, detonating in a rolling sequence that sounded like thunder. Rock and debris rained down in massive chunks, smashing into the wagons below. Warriors screamed and scattered, but there was nowhere to go. The pass had become a killing ground. "Move!" Lyra shouted to her team. "Get clear before the whole thing comes down!" They scrambled back from the edge as the cliff face continued to crack and crumble. Lyra grabbed Vex's arm and hauled her toward the designated extraction point, a narrow trail that led up and over the ridge. Behind them, the destruction continued. The roar of falling rock mixed with the screams of the dying, creating a sound that would haunt Lyra's nightmares for years. They reached the extraction point and looked back. The pass was gone. In its place was a massive pile of rubble stretching hundreds of feet high. Dust choked the air. And on both sides of the destruction, separated by tons of impassable rock, were the divided remnants of the Western clan's army. "Sweet mercy," Vex breathed. Lyra did a quick head count. 43 of her 50 fighters had made it out. 7 were missing, probably buried in the collapse. 7 lives for thousands trapped. It was a trade she'd make again, but it still hurt. "Let's go," she said quietly. "We need to get back before they regroup." They reached the northern compound 2 days later, exhausted and filthy. The main gates opened immediately when the guards recognized them. Warriors cheered as they entered, having heard the distant sound of the explosions and knowing what it meant. Kyle met them in the courtyard, his expression unreadable. "Did it work?" he asked without preamble. "The pass is gone," Lyra reported. "Supply train destroyed, their forces split, maybe 3,000 on our side of the rubble, 3,000 on the other. Casualties? Theirs? Hundreds at least, maybe more. Ours?" Lyra paused. 7. Kyle nodded slowly. "You did good." It wasn't effusive praise, but coming from him, it meant something. "They'll still come," Marcus said, appearing beside Kale. 3,000 is more than enough to take us if they're determined. "Let them come," Kale said. His eyes swept over the gathered fighters, northern clans and exiles standing together, united by necessity. "We'll be ready, Ma." The western clans attacked at dawn 3 days later. They came in waves, throwing themselves at the compound walls with desperate fury. They'd lost their supplies, their siege weapons, half their forces, but they still had numbers and rage. The fighting was brutal. Lyra fought on the eastern wall, her sword slick with blood, her muscles screaming. Around her, warriors fell and were replaced by others. The wounded were dragged back. The dead were left where they fell. The enemy kept coming. Hours blurred together. Lyra lost track of time, lost track of everything except the next opponent, the next strike, the next breath. At some point, she found herself fighting alongside Kyle. He moved like a force of nature, his sword cutting through enemy fighters with practiced efficiency. They fell into an unconscious rhythm, covering each other's backs, creating openings, moving as a unit. "Left!" Kyle shouted. Lyra spun and blocked a spear thrust, then drove her blade through the attacker's throat. Kale finished another fighter on her right. They were back-to-back now, surrounded by enemies. "Just like old times," Kyle said between breaths. Lyra froze. "What?" But there was no time to answer. The enemy pressed in, and they were fighting again. No room for words or questions. When the latest wave finally broke, when the enemy pulled back to regroup, Lyra turned to find Kyle staring at her, really staring. "I know you," he said quietly. Her blood ran cold.
The eastern border, Kyle continued, his voice distant, remembering. 3 years ago, the ambush. You were the one who shouted the warning. Lyra said nothing. You saved my life that day, and I... Kale's expression shifted from confusion to realization to horror. Oh, hell. Lyra? The name hung between them like a blade.
Lyra met his eyes and saw the moment full recognition hit. Saw him remember that night by the bonfire. The rejection. The humiliation. The girl he'd called weak and forgettable. You're supposed to be... Kyle started. Dead? Lyra finished. Sorry to disappoint. I didn't mean... Yes, you did. Her voice was flat. You meant every word. And you know what? It doesn't matter anymore. That girl died in the Deadlands. I'm what came back. Kyle opened his mouth to respond, but Marcus's shout cut him off. They're regrouping. Second wave incoming. The enemy charged again, and there was no more time for revelations. But as Lyra turned back to the wall, she saw something that made her blood freeze. Seraphina stood at the far end of the rampart, watching them. And in her hand was a small mirror, angled toward the sun, flashing a pattern. A signal. Kyle! Lyra shouted. The gate! The explosion ripped through the eastern gate, blowing it off its hinges. Enemy fighters poured through the breach, hundreds of them, far more organized than the previous waves. Someone had told them exactly where to hit, exactly when. Seraphina smiled and disappeared into the chaos. The compound was breached, the walls were compromised, and the enemy was inside. Kale met Lyra's eyes across the carnage, and she saw him understand. They'd been betrayed from within, and they were about to lose everything. The courtyard had become a slaughterhouse. Enemy fighters flooded through the shattered gate, clashing with northern defenders who'd rushed to plug the breach. Steel rang against steel, blood pooled between cobblestones. Somewhere a building was burning, smoke pouring into the sky like a dark pillar. Lyra didn't waste time processing the betrayal. That could come later, if there was a later. She grabbed Kyle's arm. Pull your fighters back to the inner keep. Abandon the outer courtyard. That's half the compound. It's already lost, Lyra shouted over the din. They've got the numbers now. If we spread thin trying to hold everything, we all die. Fall back to a defensible position and make them bleed for every inch. Kale's jaw clenched, but he nodded. He turned and bellowed orders, his voice cutting through the chaos. Northern warriors began a fighting retreat, step by bloody step, toward the inner keep. Lyra sprinted along the wall, gathering her fighters. Vex! Get everyone to the keep! Move now! What about you? I'm closing the door behind us. Lyra pointed to the gate mechanism. Someone needs to buy time. You'll get cut off. Then I'll fight my way through. Go! Vex hesitated, then nodded and disappeared into the smoke. Lyra dropped from this wall and ran toward the gate controls. The mechanism was old but solid, a series of chains and counterweights that could drop a secondary iron portcullis. It hadn't been used in years, rusted from neglect, but it might still work. She reached the control platform and grabbed the release lever. It didn't budge. Of course, she muttered, then slammed her shoulder against it, once, twice. The metal groaned but held. A shadow fell across her. She spun, sword coming up, and barely blocked the axe swing aimed at her head. The Western fighter was massive, scarred and grinning through missing teeth. Nowhere to run, little wolf, he growled. Lyra kicked him in the knee, heard something crack, then drove her blade through the gap in his armor at the shoulder. He screamed and fell. She yanked her sword free and turned back to the lever. More fighters were coming, having spotted her. She had seconds. Lyra braced her foot against the platform and pulled with everything she had. The lever shrieked, metal grinding against metal, then suddenly gave way. The portcullis dropped with a thunderous crash, cutting off the main flow of enemies through the gate. Not all of them, maybe 200 had already made it through, but it stopped the flood. A sword whistled past her ear. Lyra ducked and rolled, came up fighting. 3 enemies this time, coordinating their attacks. She gave ground, letting them think they had her cornered, then exploded forward. Her blade found one fighter's throat, her elbow shattered another's nose, and she used the third's momentum to throw him over the platform railing. She didn't wait to see him land. The inner keep was 200 yards away across an open courtyard currently filled with fighting. She ran. Enemy fighters tried to intercept her. She didn't stop, didn't engage unless she had to. A blade scraped along her ribs, drawing blood but nothing deep. Another caught her shoulder, tearing leather but missing flesh. She kept running, weaving between combatants, using the chaos as cover. 50 yards from the keep entrance, a line of Western fighters blocked her path. They'd formed up, shields interlocked, recognizing the choke point. Lyra skidded to a stop, breathing hard, mind racing. She couldn't go through them, couldn't go around. The side routes were cut off. Behind her, more enemies were closing in. Then arrows rained down from the keep walls, punching through the shield line. The formation broke, northern archers giving her an opening. Lyra sprinted through the gap, blade flashing to finish wounded fighters. She reached the keep entrance just as the heavy doors began to swing shut. "Wait!" she screamed. The doors paused. Hands grabbed her and hauled her inside. The doors slammed shut and massive bars dropped into place. Lyra collapsed against the wall, lungs burning, blood dripping from a dozen small cuts. Kale appeared, his face grim. "Status?" "Portcullis dropped," Lyra gasped. "Won't hold long, but it'll slow them." "How many made it inside the keep?" 400 northern fighters, about 60 of yours," Marcus answered, appearing from deeper in the structure. "Plus civilians, maybe 200 women, children, elderly. 700 total against 200 enemy fighters already in the compound, plus however many more would eventually break through the portcullis." The math was ugly. "The keep can hold," Kyle said, reading her expression. "It's built for this. Narrow corridors, multiple defensive positions, one entrance. They can't bring their numbers to bear." "They don't need to," Lyra said. "They just need to wait us out. How's our food situation?" The silence that followed told her everything. 3 days, Marcus finally said. "Maybe 4 if we ration hard." "Water?" "The well is inside the keep. We're fine there." "Then they'll starve us out." Lyra pushed herself upright, ignoring the protests from her body. "We need to break the siege before our supplies run out." "With what forces?" Torben demanded. He'd appeared with the other senior warriors, all of them looking battered and furious. "We're trapped in here. We still have fighters. Fighters who are exhausted, wounded, and running on fumes," Torben interrupted. "You want to send them out against superior numbers? That's suicide." "Staying here is suicide," Lyra shot back. "Just slower." "Enough," Kyle's voice cut through the argument. "We're not making decisions while we're all bleeding and pissed off. Marcus, organize the defenses. Torben, inventory our supplies. I want exact numbers. The rest of you, get patched up and get some rest. We'll reconvene in 2 hours." The warriors dispersed, muttering. Kale caught Lyra's arm as she turned to leave. "You and me," he said quietly. "We need to talk." Lyra wanted to refuse, wanted to put this conversation off indefinitely, but the look in his eyes said that wasn't an option anymore. "Fine," she said, "but make it quick. We don't have time for—" "3 years ago I destroyed you in front of the entire pack," Kyle interrupted. "I think we can spare 5 minutes." He led her to a small side chamber, probably a storage room once, now empty except for a few crates. He closed the door behind them, and suddenly the sounds of battle faded to a dull roar. They stood facing each other in the dim light filtering through a high window. "Why did you come back?" Kyle asked. "You needed allies. I had fighters. It was practical." "Bullshit. You could have stayed in the Deadlands, built your own territory, never dealt with me again." He took a step closer. "But you walked right back into the place where I humiliated you. Why?" Lyra met his eyes. "Maybe I wanted to watch you beg." "Have I?" "Begged." "Not yet." Something flickered across Kale's face. Pain, maybe, or regret. "I was wrong about you. That night at the bonfire I said things I shouldn't have said." "You said exactly what you thought," Lyra corrected. "That's not the same as being wrong." "I thought you were weak. I thought you were nobody." Kale's voice was rough. "I was an arrogant bastard who measured people by their bloodlines and their scars, and I couldn't see what was right in front of me." "And what was that?" "Someone strong enough to survive what would have killed most people. Someone smart enough to build an army from nothing. Someone brave enough to walk back into the lion's den and spit in its face." He paused. "I rejected you because I was too blind to see your worth. That's on me." Lyra felt something crack inside her chest. She'd imagined this conversation 1,000 times during those first months in the Deadlands. Imagined Kyle groveling, begging forgiveness, finally recognizing what he'd thrown away. But now that it was happening, she felt nothing. just tired emptiness. You're right, she said quietly. It is on you. And you know what? I don't care anymore. That girl you rejected died out there. I'm what's left. Lyra, don't. She held up a hand. You want forgiveness? I don't have it. You want me to say it's okay? It's not. You broke something in me that night that I had to rebuild from scratch, piece by bloody piece. So no, I didn't come back for closure or revenge or whatever you think this is. I came back because I saw an opportunity and I took it. That's all. Cale absorbed that, his expression unreadable. Then he nodded slowly. Fair enough. But we're still stuck in this keep together, still fighting the same enemy. Can we work past it, at least until we survive this? I've been working past it this whole time, Lyra pointed out. Question is whether you can. I can. Kyle extended his hand. Truce? No more secrets, no more games. Just two leaders trying to keep their people alive. Lyra looked at his offered hand, took it. His grip was strong and warm. Truce, she agreed. Until we win, or we're all dead. That's all I'm asking. A knock on the door interrupted them. Marcus's voice came through. My king, we've got a problem. They found Marcus on the upper ramparts, pointing toward the main gates, or what was left of them. The enemy had brought up a battering ram, a massive log wrapped in wet leather, carried by 20 fighters. They were methodically pounding the portcullis Lyra had dropped. Each impact sent shudders through the metal, widening the gaps. How long until it gives? Cale asked. Hour, maybe 2, Marcus estimated. Once they're through, they'll have access to the outer courtyard. They can bring up more forces, more equipment, and we'll be right back to being outnumbered, Lyra said. She studied the layout, mind racing. The keep had good sightlines to the gate area, but the range was long for their archers. Can we hit the ram from here? Too far. We'd waste arrows. What about fire? Burning oil? Not enough. We've got maybe 2 barrels left. Lyra chewed her lip, thinking. There had to be something, some advantage they could exploit. Her eyes landed on the burning building she'd noticed earlier. It was in the outer courtyard, fully engulfed now, flames licking toward the roof. That building, she said. What was it? Grain storage, Marcus answered. Why? A plan started forming. Insane, desperate, but possibly workable. How's the wind? Lyra asked. Cale frowned. Southeast. Why does that? He stopped, seeing where she was looking. No, absolutely not. It's our best option. It's suicide. Got a better idea? Cale opened his mouth, then closed it, clearly not having one. Lyra turned to Marcus. I need 20 volunteers, fast runners, good climbers. People who don't panic under pressure. For what? We're going to turn their numbers against them. Lyra pointed to the burning building, then traced a line with her finger. That fire spread southeast with the wind. There are 3 more wooden structures in its path, all dry as bone in this heat. If we accelerate the fire, create a wall of flame between the gate and the keep. We trap the fighters already in the courtyard, Kyle finished, understanding. Cut them off from reinforcements. And we force the main enemy force to either retreat or sit outside the walls while their advanced fighters get slaughtered. Lyra smiled grimly. Either way, we've bought time. And the 20 volunteers? Someone needs to set the fires manually, move through the courtyard, hit the buildings, then get back before the flames cut off their retreat. Lyra met Kyle's eyes. It's going to be dangerous. People will die. People are already dying, Kyle said. He raised his voice, addressing the gathered warriors. You heard the plan. We need 20 volunteers for a high-risk mission. No orders, no obligations. Who's willing? Hands started going up. Not just exile fighters, northern warriors too, standing shoulder to shoulder with people they'd considered criminals just days ago. More than 20, more than 50. Lyra felt something shift in her chest. These people weren't just following orders. They were choosing to trust her. She selected 20 of the fastest, youngest fighters, people with the best chance of making it back. Among them was Reyna, the scarred woman who'd questioned her before the rockslide mission. You came back from the pass, Reyna said quietly. We'll come back from this. Damn right you will, Lyra said. They moved fast. Lyra led the group down through the keep's lower levels, emerging from a small sally port on the eastern side. The courtyard was chaos, Pockets of fighting, bodies sprawled across cobblestones, smoke reducing visibility to a dozen yards. Perfect cover. They split into pairs, each with a target building. Lyra took Vex and headed for the largest structure, a storage hall 50 yards from their position. They ran low, using smoke and shadows for concealment. Twice they passed enemy fighters, but in the confusion, no one challenged them. Everyone was too busy trying to stay alive. They reached the storage hall. The door was unlocked, the interior stacked with wooden crates and barrels. "This'll burn nicely," Vex said, pulling out flint and tinder. Lyra grabbed a barrel, cracked it open. Oil, thick and pungent. She splashed it across the crates, coating everything within reach. Vex struck sparks, and flame bloomed. It spread faster than Lyra expected. Within seconds, the interior was an inferno, heat forcing them back toward the door. "Move!" Lyra shouted. They sprinted out just as the roof caught fire. Around the courtyard, other buildings were beginning to burn, smoke pillars rising into the sky. The enemy noticed. Commanders started shouting orders, trying to organize bucket brigades, but it was too late. The fires were too big, too hot, spreading too fast, and the wind was pushing it all toward the gate. Lyra and Vex ran for the sally port, weaving between burning buildings. Behind them, the courtyard was transforming into hell. Flames leaped from structure to structure. Fighters scattered, some trying to fight the fires, others just trying to escape. The battering ram crew abandoned their posts, retreating from the approaching wall of fire. Lyra reached the sally port and counted heads. 18 fighters made it back. 2 didn't. The cost kept adding up. Inside the keep, they climbed to the ramparts and watched their handiwork. The outer courtyard was burning. A solid wall of flame separated the keep from the main gates, cutting the enemy force in half. The 200 fighters trapped on the keep side were being systematically hunted down by Northern and Exile forces working together. Without reinforcements, they didn't last long. At the gates, the main Western force watched helplessly as their advance fighters died. They couldn't push through the flames without suffering massive casualties. And going around meant a week-long march through rough terrain. "They're retreating," Marcus said, disbelief in his voice. He was right. The Western forces were pulling back from the gates, abandoning the siege. A ragged cheer went up from the keep defenders. Warriors embraced, laughing with relief and exhaustion. Kale stood beside Lyra, watching the enemy withdraw. "We won." "We survived," Lyra corrected. "Not the same thing." "Close enough for today." Kale turned to face her. "You saved us. Again. I owe you—" "You owe me the truth about Serafina," Lyra interrupted. "She signaled them, told them where to hit the gate." "Where is she?" Kale's expression darkened. "Locked in the lower chambers, under guard. I want to talk to her." "Lyra—" "She betrayed all of us. Northern, Exile, everyone. I want to know why." Kael studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Come on." They found Serafina in a small cell, sitting on a stone bench with her hands bound. She looked up as they entered, her expression defiant despite the circumstances. "Come to gloat?" she asked Lyra. "Come for answers," Lyra replied. "Why did you do it? Why do you think? The northern clans are dying. Kael's too stubborn to see it, but the western territories are the future. They have wealth, trade, stability. All Kael has is pride and scars. So you sold us out for what? A place in their hierarchy?" "I secured my survival," Serafina said coldly. "Something you should understand, Exile. You've done worse for less." Lyra felt Kael tense beside her, but kept her own voice calm. "I've killed to survive. I've stolen, lied, and fought dirty. But I've never betrayed people who trusted me. That's a different kind of evil." "Is it?" Serafina's smile was ugly. "You walked into this territory under false pretenses. You didn't tell anyone who you really were. You manipulated Kael, used his guilt, played on his need for allies. And you call me the betrayer? I never claimed to be his mate," Lyra shot back. "Never stood beside him and pretended loyalty while planning his destruction. No, you just want revenge for him hurting your feelings 3 years ago." Serafina laughed bitterly. "We're not so different, you and me. We both use people to get what we want." Lyra opened her mouth to argue, then stopped. Because there was a kernel of truth there, buried under the venom. She had manipulated the situation, had used Kael's need for allies to position herself, had let him discover her identity only when it served her purposes. The difference was intent. She'd never planned to destroy him. But Serafina had a point. Lyra's hands weren't clean either. "What happens now?" Serafina asked, looking at Kael. "You going to execute me? Make an example?" Kael's voice was hard as stone. "Exile. You leave Northern Territory at dawn. If you ever return, you die. That's the mercy I'm giving you." "Mercy," Serafina repeated. "Why? How generous. And what about your little reunion with the Exile Queen? Going to make her your new mate now that I'm gone?" "Get out," Kael said quietly. "I bet she'd love that. Full circle, right? The girl you rejected becomes the woman you—" "I said get out." Kael's voice dropped to a growl. "Now." Guards entered and dragged Serafina out, her bitter laughter echoing down the corridor. When they were alone, Kael sank onto the bench and put his head in his hands. 3 years. I trusted her for 3 years. Lyra sat beside him, maintaining a careful distance. "You couldn't have known." "I should have. I'm the Alpha King. I'm supposed to see these things." "Nobody sees everything, not even kings." They sat in silence for a moment. Above them, the sounds of celebration continued as warriors reveled in their survival. "What she said," Kael began carefully, "about you manipulating me. Was she right?" Lyra considered lying. It would be easy, but the truce they'd made was built on honesty. "Partially," she admitted. "I came here knowing who you were and what you'd done. I used that knowledge to position myself as valuable. But I never planned to betray you. The alliance was real. The strategy was real. Everything I did to help you survive was real. Just not your reasons for doing it." "My reasons were complicated. Still are." Lyra turned to look at him. "I won't pretend I came here purely to help, but I also won't apologize for surviving however I needed to." Kael was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I don't blame you. Hell, I respect it. You turned your weakness into strength, your humiliation into power. That takes guts. Or desperation. Sometimes they're the same thing." Kael stood, offering his hand. "Come on. Our people are celebrating. We should join them." Lyra took his hand and let him pull her up. "Think they're ready to see us together?" "Probably not. But they'll adjust." Kael smiled, and it was the first genuine smile she'd seen from him. "They're survivors, same as us." They walked back to the main hall together, and when they entered, the celebration paused. Warriors from both groups turned to stare. Northern and Exile, former enemies, now looking at their leaders standing side by side. Marcus raised a cup. "To the Alpha King and the Exile Commander. They kept us alive when we should have died." "To survival," someone shouted. "To victory," another voice called. The hall erupted in cheers. Cups were raised, food was shared, and for the first time since Lyra had returned to Northern Territory, she felt something like hope. It wouldn't last. There would be more battles, more betrayals, more blood. The Western clans would regroup, other enemies would emerge, and the complicated history between her and Kael would continue to cast shadows. But tonight, they'd won, and tomorrow, they'd figure out what came next. Vex appeared at Lyra's elbow, grinning. "So, this went well. We're alive, that's about all I can say. And the king knows who you are now." "Yeah. And he hasn't tried to kill you." "Also true. So maybe this whole revenge that turned into an alliance thing worked out?" Lyra looked across the hall to where Kael was speaking with his senior warriors. As if sensing her gaze, he glanced up and met her eyes. Something passed between them. Understanding, maybe, or the beginning of mutual respect. "Maybe," Lyra said quietly. "We'll see." Because the truth was, she didn't know what happened next. The girl who'd been rejected 3 years ago had wanted revenge. The woman who'd survived the Deadlands had wanted respect. But the leader standing here now, she wanted something more complicated than either. She wanted to build something that would last. Something stronger than pride or vengeance or survival. And looking at Kael across the crowded hall, seeing him smile at something Marcus said, seeing him relax for the first time since she'd arrived, maybe, just maybe, that was possible. The celebration lasted until dawn, but Lyra left early. She found herself on the eastern wall, watching the sun rise over the scarred landscape. The fires had burned themselves out overnight, leaving blackened skeletons of buildings and a courtyard covered in ash. Bodies were being collected, both enemy and ally, laid out in rows for burial or burning, depending on pack customs. The cost of survival, written in corpses. Can't sleep? Lyra turned to find Kyle approaching, 2 cups in his hands. He offered her one. She sniffed it. Water, not alcohol. Smart. Clear heads were needed now. Too much to think about, she admitted. Kyle leaned against the wall beside her, looking out at the destruction. We should talk about what happens next. I was wondering when we'd get to this. The truce expires once the immediate threat is gone. That was the deal. Kyle's voice was careful, measured. The Western clans retreated, but they'll regroup. They've got thousands more fighters and the resources to sustain a long campaign. We bought time, not victory. I know. So the question is whether our alliance continues. And on what terms? Lyra took a sip of water, organizing her thoughts. This conversation would determine everything, not just her future, but the future of every exile who'd followed her here. My people proved themselves, she said. We fought, bled, and died beside yours. The Deadland Coalition isn't just a gang of criminals anymore. We're a legitimate force. Agreed. Which is why I'm prepared to formalize our alliance. Trade agreements, territorial recognition, mutual defense. Kale paused. Under certain conditions. Which are? Integration, not absorption. I'm not asking you to dissolve your coalition, but we need unified command structure, coordinated strategy, shared resources. We can't afford to be 2 separate forces anymore. Lyra had expected this. It made tactical sense, but it also meant giving up some autonomy, putting her people under joint leadership. Who commands? She asked bluntly. Kale met her eyes. We both do. Co-leadership. You handle the Deadland forces and Eastern territories. I handle the Northern clans and Western approach. Major decisions we make together. That's not how pack hierarchy works. There's always one alpha. Then maybe it's time we changed how things work. Kyle's expression was serious. I'm not going to pretend I'm doing this purely out of progressive ideals. The truth is, we need each other. Your strategic mind, your fighters, your knowledge of the outer territories, I can't win without those. And you need the legitimacy and resources the Northern clans provide. So it's practical. Everything worth doing is practical. Kale turned to face her fully. But it's also more than that. What you built in the Deadlands, taking broken people and giving them purpose, structure, loyalty, that's real leadership. The kind I was too arrogant to recognize before. I was wrong about you, Lyra. Completely wrong. And I'm trying to make it right. Lyra studied his face, looking for deception or manipulation, but all she saw was honesty. Uncomfortable, awkward honesty from a man not used to admitting mistakes. If we do this, she said slowly, my people get equal treatment. No second-class status, no discrimination because they're exiles. And any Northern warriors who can't accept that can leave. Done. And I want a seat at the council table. Official recognition as a territorial leader, not just a military ally. Also done. And Lyra hesitated, then pushed forward. I want the truth about that night, 3 years ago. Why did you really reject me? Kale's expression tightened. That's not a political negotiation. No, but it matters. If we're going to lead together, I need to understand what I'm working with. Kale was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the sunrise. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough. My father chose his mate for love. She was from a minor family, no political connections, no wealth. Just a woman he cared about. Kale's hands gripped the wall. And when the Southern Packs invaded 15 years ago, they used her as leverage, kidnapped her, tortured her, sent pieces back until my father agreed to their terms. He gave up half our territory to get her back. And when they returned her, she was so broken she died within a year. Lyra said nothing, letting him continue. I watched my father destroy himself trying to save her. Watched him sacrifice everything, territory, warriors, pride, for one person. And I swore I would never make that mistake. When I took the throne, I decided my mate would be chosen for political advantage, nothing else. Someone from a powerful family who brought allies and resources. Serafina. Yes, she was perfect on paper.
Western clan heritage, diplomatic skills, family connections. Kale laughed bitterly. Turns out perfect on paper means nothing in reality. And me?
You were everything I'd sworn to avoid. Low-born, no connections, no political value. But you'd saved my life, and people noticed. They started speculating, suggesting I should honor the debt by choosing you. Kale turned to look at her. And I panicked, because when I thought about it, about actually choosing you, I realized I wanted to. Not for political reasons, just because something in me recognized something in you. Lyra's breath caught. So I destroyed it before it could become a problem, Kyle continued. I rejected you publicly, brutally, making sure no one would ever suggest it again, making sure I wouldn't be tempted. He paused. I told myself I was being practical, making the smart choice, but really I was just a coward. You were scared of caring about someone, Lyra said quietly, terrified, and I hurt you because of it. That's the truth you wanted. They stood in silence as the sun climbed higher, painting the devastated courtyard in shades of gold and red. I don't forgive you, Lyra finally said. Not completely. What you did still hurts, even 3 years later. But I understand it now, and understanding is enough to work with. That's all I can ask for. So, co-leadership, equal partnership, my people protected and valued. Yes, Lyra extended her hand. Then we have a deal. Kale took it, his grip strong and sure. Partners. Partners? Lyra agreed. A shout from below interrupted them. Marcus was running across the courtyard, waving urgently. My king, riders approaching from the west. Lyra and Kale exchanged a glance, then ran for the stairs. By the time they reached the gates, a small group of riders had arrived under a white flag of truce. They were Western clan warriors, armor-polished, weapons peace-bonded, and at their head rode a woman Lyra recognized from intelligence reports. Lady Helena, mother of the Western clan's alpha and the real power behind their territory. She was old, maybe 70, with silver hair and eyes sharp as broken glass. Kyle met her at the gate, Lyra at his side. Marcus and a dozen warriors flanked them. Lady Helena, Kale said formally. This is unexpected. I imagine it is. Helena's gaze swept over the burned courtyard, the bodies being removed, the exhausted defenders on the walls. You've had quite the week. We've survived. That's what matters. Indeed. Helena's attention shifted to Lyra. And you must be the exile commander everyone's talking about, the woman who dropped a mountain on 3,000 of my fighters. Guilty, Lyra said evenly. Impressive. Reckless, but impressive. Helena turned back to Kyle. I've come to discuss terms. What terms? You just tried to exterminate us. That wasn't my decision. My son ordered the assault against my advice. Helena's expression soured. He's young, ambitious, and foolish. He thought overwhelming force would crush you quickly. Instead, he lost half his army and accomplished nothing except proving that the northern clans are more resilient than expected. So you're here to apologize. Kale's tone was skeptical. I'm here to propose a ceasefire. Permanent, with formal treaties. Helena gestured to the devastation. This benefits no one. We've lost thousands of fighters. You've lost territory and resources. The southern packs are watching all of this and planning how to exploit our weakness. If we keep bleeding each other, we all lose. And in exchange for this ceasefire, mutual non-aggression, trade agreements, and the return of your former mate, Serafina, to face justice in your territory. That got everyone's attention. Murmurs rippled through the northern warriors. You have Serafina? Lyra asked. She fled here after you exiled her, begged for asylum, claimed she'd been betrayed. Helena's smile was cold. But we have our own intelligence networks. We know what she did. She played both sides, fed information to my son while pretending loyalty to you. That kind of duplicity is useful in moderation, but she was sloppy, got people killed unnecessarily. So you're handing her over. Consider it a gesture of good faith. Along with this. Helena pulled a sealed document from her saddlebag and handed it to Kyle. A treaty proposal. Read it, discuss with your advisors. I'll return in 3 days for your answer. She turned her horse to leave, then paused. One more thing. My son won't accept this treaty. He still thinks he can win through force. So in 3 days, you'll likely receive 2 visitors, me with a treaty and him with another army.
Helena met Kael's eyes. Choose wisely. She rode away, her escort following, leaving stunned silence behind. It's a trap, Torben said immediately. Has to be. Maybe, Kael said, breaking the seal on the document. Or maybe she's genuine. The Western clans aren't monolithic. There are factions, power struggles. A civil war we could exploit, Marcus suggested. Lyra read over Kael's shoulder. The treaty was surprisingly generous. Territorial recognition for both the northern clans and the Deadland Coalition, trade concessions, mutual defense against southern aggression. Too generous. What's the catch? She asked. Here. Kael pointed to a clause near the end. Marriage alliance. To cement the peace, the Western clans propose a union between their territory and ours. Let me guess, Lyra said. You marry one of Helena's relatives? No. Kael's voice was awed. They're proposing you marry Helena's nephew, a high-ranking Western lord, apparently being groomed for leadership. Lyra stared at the document. They want to bind the Deadland Coalition to the Western clans through marriage? It would neutralize you as a threat while giving them influence over the exile territories, Marcus said. Smart politics. Absolutely not, Kael said flatly. Everyone turned to look at him. The treaty stays, Kael continued, but that clause gets renegotiated. Lyra's not a bargaining chip. With respect, my king, Torben said carefully, this might be our best path to peace. One political marriage to end the bloodshed. I said no. Kael's voice left no room for argument. We'll find another way to seal the alliance, but Lyra makes her own choices about her future. That's non-negotiable. Lyra felt something warm and complicated unfurl in her chest. She pushed it down, focusing on the practical. What if I want to consider it? She asked. Kael looked at her sharply. Do you? I'm asking hypothetically. What if the marriage alliance is the only way to guarantee peace? What if saying no means more war, more death? Then we fight, Kael said simply. We've done it before. We'll do it again. That's not practical. I don't care. Some things are worth fighting for. His eyes held hers, including the right to choose your own path. The moment stretched between them, charged with something neither was ready to name. Marcus cleared his throat. Perhaps we should take this inside, review the full treaty, consider our options. They spent the next 3 days preparing for both possibilities, peace or war. Lyra worked with Kael to draft a counterproposal, removing the marriage clause and adding stronger protections for exile rights. They fortified the damaged sections of the compound, brought in supplies, and sent scouts to monitor Western clan movements. And they waited. On the third day, 2 groups arrived simultaneously. From the west, Lady Helena with a small diplomatic contingent. From the south, a massive army led by her son, Alpha Lord Damien, with at least 4,000 fresh fighters. The choice Helena had warned about was here. Kael assembled everyone in the main courtyard, northern warriors, exile fighters, civilians, everyone who'd survived the siege. He stood on the platform where, 3 years ago, he'd rejected Lyra in front of the entire pack. The irony wasn't lost on her. Lady Helena stood to one side, Damien on the other. The young Alpha looked furious, his hand resting on his sword hilt. You had 3 days to consider, Helena said. Have you reached a decision? We have, Kael replied. He held up the treaty. We accept, with modifications. The marriage clause is removed. Instead, we propose a different alliance seal, a joint council of 3 territories, Northern clans, Western clans, and Deadland Coalition, equal representation, shared decision-making on matters affecting all 3. Damien laughed harshly. You expect us to share power with exiles and criminals? Mother, this is ridiculous. Is it? Helena asked mildly. The exile commander destroyed half your army with 100 fighters and some rocks. Imagine what she could do with actual resources and legitimacy. I don't care what she did. She's nobody, a low-born upstart who got lucky. The courtyard went very quiet. Lyra stepped forward. I've heard that before. Didn't end well for the person who said it, Damien sneered. You threatening me, exile? Stating facts. Your father underestimated opponents and lost battles because of it. His son apparently learned nothing, Lyra's voice carried across the courtyard. You brought 4,000 fighters to intimidate us into submission, but you're forgetting something crucial. What's that? We're not afraid of you anymore, Lyra gestured to the assembled crowd.
Everyone here has survived things that should have killed them. We've fought impossible odds and won. We've built alliances from ashes and turned weakness into strength. So bring your army. Throw them against our walls. You'll lose, just like you lost before. Only this time, we'll make sure you don't get a chance to regroup. The Northern and Exile warriors roared approval, weapons raised. Damien's face flushed red. How dare— Enough! Helena's voice cut through the noise. She turned to her son. You've embarrassed yourself and our clan enough. Stand down. Mother, you can't seriously— I said stand down. Helena's eyes were ice. Or challenge me for leadership right here. Your choice. Father and son stared at each other. Finally, Damien stepped back, jaw clenched. Helena turned to Kale. The modified treaty is acceptable. We'll establish the Joint Council immediately. And as a gesture of good faith, I'm formally recognizing the Deadland Coalition as a sovereign territory with all rights and privileges that entails. She pulled out a sealed proclamation and handed it to Lyra. You've earned this, Helena said quietly. Most exiles die forgotten in those territories. You built something that will outlast you, that deserves recognition. Lyra took the document with shaking hands. Official recognition, legitimacy. Everything she'd fought for, written in formal script and sealed with the Western clan's mark. Thank you, she managed. Don't thank me yet. Leadership is harder than survival. You'll find that out soon enough. Helena mounted her horse. The treaty signing will be in 1 month, neutral ground. Be there. She rode off. Damien and his army followed, leaving dust and silence. The courtyard exploded in celebration. Warriors embraced, civilians cheered, children ran wild. Someone started a chant, "Long live the Alliance, long live the Coalition." Kael found Lyra in the chaos. You did it. Everything you came here for. We did it, Lyra corrected. I couldn't have gotten here alone. Neither could I, Kael smiled. Partners? Partners. They shook hands and the crowd roared louder. But Lyra's mind was already moving forward. Recognition was just the beginning. Now came the hard part, building something sustainable, creating structures that would last, proving that exiles and pack wolves could coexist as equals. It would take years, maybe decades. And she'd probably make mistakes, face setbacks, deal with people who resented the changes. But that was tomorrow's problem. Tonight, she'd won. The celebration continued into the night, but eventually Lyra slipped away. She found herself back on the eastern wall, looking out at the territories she'd fought so hard to claim. Thought I'd find you here. Kael appeared beside her, carrying 2 cups again. This time the contents were definitely alcohol. Can't stay away? Lyra asked. Apparently not. Kael handed her a cup. To surviving the unsurvivable. They drank in comfortable silence. What happens now? Kael finally asked. With us, I mean. Not the politics. Lyra considered the question. 3 years ago, she would have given anything to hear him ask it. 6 months ago, she would have used it as a weapon, leverage to gain advantage. Now? I don't know, she admitted. We've got history, most of it bad, and we're about to be incredibly busy running territories and managing alliances. That's all true. But, Lyra continued slowly, we also work well together. We balance each other. Your strategic caution with my tactical aggression, your political knowledge with my unconventional thinking. Also true. So maybe we see where it goes. No expectations, no promises, just 2 people who've survived hell and come out the other side. Kael smiled. I can work with that. A commotion at the gate drew their attention. Guards were bringing in a prisoner under heavy guard, Seraphina, looking considerably worse than when Lyra had last seen her. Her elegant clothes were torn and dirty, her face bruised. The Western clan sent her ahead, Marcus called up. Said she's yours to deal with. Kael looked at Lyra. Your call. She betrayed both of us. Lyra descended to the courtyard, studying her former rival. Seraphina looked back with defiant hatred. Come to gloat? Seraphina spat. The lowborn trash finally gets her revenge? No, Lyra said. I came to offer you a choice. That got Seraphina's attention. What choice? Exile to the true Deadlands, the deep territories where even my people don't go. You'll have supplies for a week, basic weapons, and a chance to survive. Or execution here, public, tomorrow, at dawn.
That's not a choice. That's two different deaths.
Maybe. Or maybe you survive out there, same as I did. Build something from nothing. Prove you're stronger than your mistakes. Lyra leaned closer. You said we weren't that different. Here's your chance to prove it. Serafina's eyes narrowed. Why? Why give me anything? Because someone once told me that mercy is weakness. I want to prove them wrong. Lyra straightened. Decide by morning. Guards, take her to a cell. As they led Serafina away, Kyle appeared at Lyra's side. That was generous. That was strategic. If she survives, she might build something useful. If she doesn't, the problem solves itself. Lyra smiled. Besides, I meant what I said. I want to be more than what I was made to be. What were you made to be? Weak, forgettable, nothing. Lyra looked up at him. But I became something else. And I'm not done becoming yet. Kale studied her face in the moonlight. No, you're definitely not done. None of us are. The next morning, Serafina chose exile. Lyra watched her walk through the gates with a pack and knife, heading toward territories that would either kill her or forge her into something new. Part of Lyra hoped she'd make it. A smaller part hoped she wouldn't. Mostly, she just felt tired. The real work began immediately after. The Joint Council required organization, logistics, legal frameworks. Territories needed to be surveyed and borders established. Trade routes had to be secured. Laws had to be written that applied equally to pack wolves and exiles. It was exhausting, tedious, and absolutely necessary. Lyra threw herself into it with the same intensity she'd brought to survival in the Deadlands. Only now, instead of fighting for her next meal, she was fighting for institutions that would outlast her. 6 months after the siege, the first Joint Council meeting was held. Representatives from all 3 territories gathered in neutral ground, a valley between the northern and western lands. Temporary structures had been erected, guards posted, and every detail negotiated down to seating arrangements. Lyra sat at the head table between Kyle and Helena, with territorial representatives arranged below. Some faces were hostile, others curious, a few genuinely hopeful. This council represents a new era, Helena began, her voice carrying across the assembled delegates. For too long, our territories have been divided by tradition, prejudice, and fear. Today, we choose something different. Not because it's easy, but because it's necessary. Kael stood next. The northern clans have always valued strength above all else. We thought strength meant standing alone, proving we needed no one. We were wrong. Real strength is knowing when to build alliances, when to share power, when to adapt to survive. Then it was Lyra's turn. She stood slowly, aware of every eye on her. Some of these people had called her trash, criminal, upstart. Some had tried to kill her. All of them were watching to see if she deserved to be here. 3 years ago, Lyra began, I was rejected as weak and worthless. I was told I would never be anything, never matter. And you know what? Part of me believed it. I thought maybe they were right. Maybe I was nothing. She paused, letting the words settle. But I was wrong, and so were they, because I survived things that should have killed me. I built things from nothing. I turned exile into strength and weakness into power. Not because I'm special, but because I refused to accept the story other people wrote for me. Lyra's voice strengthened. Everyone in the Deadland Coalition has a similar story. We were all rejected, abandoned, told we didn't matter, and we all proved them wrong. So to anyone here who still thinks exiles are lesser, who believes in pure bloodlines and traditional hierarchies, watch closely, because we're about to show you what real strength looks like. The exile delegates erupted in cheers. Even some northern and western representatives nodded approval. The council session lasted 6 hours. They established basic frameworks, resolved initial disputes, and created committees to handle ongoing issues. It wasn't perfect. Arguments broke out. Old prejudices surfaced. Compromises were painful. But it worked. As the session ended and delegates dispersed, Kyle found Lyra outside. That was quite the speech. Felt necessary, Lyra stretched, working out the tension from hours of sitting. Think it helped? I think you reminded everyone why you're here. Why you deserve to be here. Kyle paused. I'm proud of you. Lyra looked at him in surprise. That's unexpected. Is it? You've accomplished more in 3 years than most people do in a lifetime. Built an alliance from scratch, survived impossible odds, changed how entire territories think about exile and redemption. Kael smiled. If I can't be proud of that, what can I be proud of? Your own accomplishments? You held the northern clans together through multiple wars. With your help. Which is my point. We're better together than apart. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the valley. I've been thinking, Kael said carefully, about the future, about where we go from here. Politically or personally? Both. He turned to face her. Politically, the alliance is working. The Joint Council is functional. Trade is improving. We're building something sustainable. Agreed. Personally, Kael trailed off, then started again. 3 years ago, I destroyed something before it could begin. I was scared and stupid, and I hurt you because of it. I can't change that, but I can ask for a chance to build something new. Lyra's heart hammered. What are you asking? I'm asking if you'd consider letting me court you. Properly this time. No politics, no alliances, no ulterior motives. Just two people seeing if there's something worth exploring. Kael, I know it's complicated. I know I don't deserve a second chance, but I'm asking anyway. His eyes held hers. Because when I look at you now, I don't see the girl I rejected. I see the woman who saved my territory, challenged my assumptions, and made me question everything I thought I knew about strength and leadership. And I want to know who else you might become. Who we might become. Together. Lyra's mind raced. Every practical instinct said this was a bad idea. They were co-leaders of a fragile alliance. Personal entanglements would complicate everything, and there was still so much unresolved pain between them. But she'd spent 3 years being practical, being careful, building walls to protect herself. Maybe it was time to risk something again. One condition, she said. Name it. If we do this, we do it as equals. Not Alpha King and Exile Commander. Not political allies using each other, just Kael and Lyra figuring things out. Deal. And if it doesn't work, if we try and it falls apart, we stay professional. The alliance doesn't suffer because we couldn't make it personal work. Agreed. Then yes, Lyra said. You can court me. We'll see where it goes. Kael's smile was genuine and warm. Thank you. He reached for her hand, hesitated, then took it anyway. His grip was strong and sure. Lyra squeezed back. They stood together, watching the last light fade from the sky, and for the first time in 3 years, Lyra felt something close to peace. The road ahead would be difficult. There would be setbacks, betrayals, struggles. The alliance would face tests that might break it. Her relationship with Kael might crash and burn spectacularly, but she'd survived worse, and this time she wasn't alone. 1 year later, Lyra stood in the same valley for the annual council meeting, but this time the temporary structures had been replaced with permanent buildings. The Joint Council now met quarterly, with active committees handling everything from trade disputes to judicial appeals. The alliance had weathered 2 attempted coups, 1 famine, and countless minor crises. And it had held. Lyra wore formal council robes now, marked with symbols representing all 3 territories. Beside her, Kael wore matching robes. Their relationship had progressed slowly, carefully, building trust one day at a time. They weren't perfect. They argued frequently, clashed over strategy, drove each other crazy with their different approaches. But they worked. As the latest council session ended, a young girl approached Lyra nervously. She was maybe 14, wearing exile markings and carrying a worn pack. "Excuse me," the girl said quietly. "Are you Commander Lyra?" "I am." "I'm from the Outer Deadlands. My family was exiled when I was young. I've been surviving out there for 2 years. The girl straightened her shoulders. "I heard what you did, how you built the coalition, and I wanted to ask, is there room for more?" Lyra looked at the girl and saw herself 3 years ago, scared, desperate, but refusing to break. "There's always room," Lyra said. "What's your name?" "Kira." "Well, Kira, welcome to the coalition. First thing you need to know, we don't just survive here, we thrive, and we're going to teach you how." The girl's eyes lit up with hope. Lyra assigned her to one of the training groups and watched her walk away with new purpose. Kael appeared at her side. "Another recruit? Another survivor who deserves a chance." Lyra smiled. "Just like I got. You made your own chances. Someone gave me the opportunity to try. I'm just passing it forward." They walked together toward the council hall, where representatives were gathering for an evening meal. Warriors and diplomats, exiles and purebloods, former enemies now sharing food and conversation. It wasn't perfect harmony. Tension still existed. Prejudices still surfaced. Some people would never fully accept the changes, but it was progress. And progress was enough. That night, after the council feast, Lyra found herself alone with Kael in the gardens outside the hall. "I've been thinking," Kael said, "about the future again. That's becoming a habit with you." "It's a good habit. Someone has to plan for tomorrow." "And what does tomorrow look like?" Lyra asked. Kael took her hand. "Honestly, I don't know. There are too many variables, too many things that could go wrong, but I know I want you in it, however that looks. As co-leaders, as partners, in every sense." Lyra understood what he was asking. Not just political alliance, not just personal relationship, but full commitment. Building a life together, leading together, facing whatever came as a unified force. 3 years ago, that offer would have meant everything. 1 year ago, it would have terrified her. Now? "Yes," she said simply. Kyle blinked. "Yes? Yes, to all of it. Partnership, leadership, whatever comes next. We've proven we work well together. We've built something neither of us could have built alone. So yes, let's keep building." Kale pulled her close, and Lyra let herself relax into his embrace. It felt strange and right all at once. Being held instead of fighting, trusting instead of surviving, choosing vulnerability instead of armor. "I love you," Kale said quietly. "I should have said it months ago, but I was scared you'd think it was politics or guilt or—" "I know," Lyra interrupted. "I love you too, even though you're infuriating and stubborn and too rigid sometimes. You're reckless and impulsive, and you give me heart attacks with your strategies. We balance each other. We do." They kissed, and somewhere in the distance, someone started playing music. The celebration was continuing, the alliance was holding, and tomorrow would bring new challenges. But tomorrow could wait. Tonight, Lyra Vance, once rejected as weak and worthless, now recognized as a leader and partner, stood in a garden with the man who'd broken her and whom she'd rebuilt herself to match, and felt something she'd thought she'd lost forever in the Deadlands. Hope. Not naive hope, not the desperate hope of someone with no other options, but the grounded, realistic hope of someone who'd survived hell and come out the other side strong enough to build heaven from the ashes. She'd proven everyone wrong, proven she was more than they'd said, built a throne from rejection and turned weakness into unshakable strength. And this time, no one would ever make her feel powerless again, because she'd learned the most important truth of all: power isn't given. It's taken. It's built. It's earned through blood and sweat and refusing to quit when everything says you should. And once you claim it, once you truly own it, no one can ever take it away. Lyra had claimed her power, and she was just getting started. "Pa,"